Hi, everybody. We are back with, once again, we're honored to have Dr. Hardt with us. Dr. Hardt, thank you so much for being here.
I'm always overjoyed to talk with you.
Now, for anybody that watched a previous video that we recorded, I twisted Dr. Hardt's arm because I needed to know this story. Dr. Hardt, you were talking about a writer who had written 16 books, was on the bestsellers list, and for 2.5 years, he had writer's block. And in the alpha training, he was able to tap into his muse, right, and get over that writer's block, write his 17th book. But what you also told us was that you put on, I believe you said, your Sherlock Holmes hat, and you discovered what was the cause of this writer's block. And I'm just dying to know, and I'm sure a lot of other people are as well.
Well, this particular famous author has now passed on, so it would be okay to actually mention his name, which would give people a little bit more context. It was a very fascinating way that this guy came to Biocybernaut. I had been invited by John Butcher, the chairman, CEO of Precious Moments, at the time a $500 million company, to move my training center to the family estate in St. Charles, Illinois, and train almost all members of the family and many of the members of his company, like his chief operations officer, his creative director, and of course himself, and all the family members worked in the company, and each one of them had some fascinating stories. But at the end of, I think we were there 7 months, the we moved the training center back to California. But unbeknownst to me, John Butcher had interviewed all the people that he had put through the training there in the center that he built in a barn in St. Charles, Illinois, on the family estate. And every single one of these family members said they would recommend the training to someone else. Well, John said these people had never agreed on anything. So he realized there's something really profound going on here. So he made a plan, unbeknownst to me. He was going to sell Precious Moments, divest, and then put $5 million into building a world-class Biocybernaut Center and bring in CEOs of major corporations through a lawyer-to-lawyer referral network. That was his plan. And so as we go forward, he brought in a dear friend of his and a counselor to him, Nathaniel Brandon, a famous author who had written 16 books and had won international acclaim. But John told me that Nathaniel had been struggling for 2.5 years, unable to write his 17th book. He was in writer's block. And writing was so important to him that he was only with John, darkly talking about suicide, saying, well, to write is to live, and to live is to write. And if I can't write, why to live? And so John told Nathaniel about the Biocybernaut training. He was all excited and he wanted to come and do it. And he was going to pay for himself to do it. Well, along the way, John thought to ask Nathaniel to interview me repeatedly over the course of several weeks about the scientific and philosophical underpinnings of the Biocybernaut training. And so he would send me, I'm leading a training, so answering his emails, would take more than half the night. But it was exciting. He would send me like 25 questions, and I would answer 23. And then the next day, he'd send me 17 questions, and I would answer 15. And by the end of the week, he said, Dr. Hardt, I've noticed that there are certain questions that you're not answering. And you're going to have to answer these questions because John Butcher has appointed me to discover the scientific and philosophical underpinnings of the Biocybernaut training. And so you're going to have to answer. Well, now, the reason that I had not been answering these questions is because to answer them, I would have to talk about ego. And John had told me that as a young man, Nathaniel had actually been lovers for a while with Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand, she has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. She is the epitome of objectivism and selfishness and ego. So I had the strong suspicion that Nathaniel was deeply imbued with ego, and I didn't want to, shall we say, queer the deal by angering his ego. So these questions that I didn't answer, I would have to talk about ego. And I'd gone a whole week answering, 90% of his questions, but avoiding the ones where I would have to talk about ego. Okay, so I took a deep breath and I put my hands on the keyboard and I started to type. Who you think yourself to be, you will know at the end of this week you never were that person. You'll be far more conscious, far more aware, far more loving. And it was like a nuclear bomb had gone off. You young whippersnapper, don't you talk to me like that. I know Alan Greenspan. I'm going to shut you down. You're never going to do anything economic in this world again. Whoa, it was like Vesuvius going off in the middle of my study. And so at this point, absolutely, there's no way he's going to do the training. But John Butcher wanted him to do the training. So to get him to do the training, and John was in it, John had to pay his training fee, and he had to pay Nathaniel his extraordinarily high hourly rate to do the training. And so Nathaniel's there in his three-piece suit, and he hates my guts. You could just see he wants to rip my heart out. But he's being professional. He has this phony smile plastered on his face. And I noticed on the first day that his left occipital, he's right-handed, so this would normally be the second biggest channel in alpha, second biggest alpha channel. And 80% of people have their biggest alpha occipitally. 93% of adults are right-handed, which means a dominant left hemisphere. It's harder for the dominant hemisphere to relax, let go, be an alpha. So for most of these 93% of right-handers, their biggest alpha is in the right hemisphere. And the second biggest is the left occipital. But the left occipital was almost vanishingly small alpha. It was lower than the temporals, which I call the poor stepchildren of the alpha world. And so I say, well, Nathaniel, I know exactly why you've been in writer's block for 2.5 years. Now I have his attention in a way that was not there before. I said, well, look, your left hemisphere is logical, analytical, and verbal. And so without alpha, you can't be creative. And guess what? Logical, analytical, and verbal ways. Well, okay, so I said, now tomorrow, I want you to focus on the lower left score on the screen, which is your left occipital, the lowest pitch tone, which comes from the left rear speaker, and just work on that. Well, he did. And he was very good. He brought it from a distant last up into the middle of the pack, the centrals and the temporals and the frontals, which is a huge improvement. And so then on the third day, he makes more progress and the left occipital pops out of the pack. And now it's second only to his dominant right occipital. And so my technician, Miguel, saw movement on the polygraph and he'd hear talking in the chamber. And he'd call in, Mr. Nathaniel, are you okay? Oh, yeah, everything's fine. And so at the end, we found what was happening. He was in alpha. The muse of all writers had appeared to him, and she was downloading the complete character development plot, everything about this book that he'd been in writer's block for 2.5 years. The inability of which to write was causing him to talk about suicide. And so he would have a little pocket tape recorder, he'd take it out of his pocket, get a download from the muse, talk it into the tape recorder, turn off the tape recorder, back into alpha, get a download, talk it into the tape recorder, get a download, talk it. And by the end of the third day, that entire book was written. It was completely ready just to go into the typewriter. And so now he couldn't say enough nice things about me, how handsome I was, how smart I was, how professional I was. I mean, he just like went from wanting to rip my heart out to like he just couldn't say enough nice things. But this is just the third day of the training. Now, he's solved his life problem. He's now got his book. But it's only now we start the next day, fourth day of the training. We got 4 more days left, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And so I wanted to know, how did this famous author get thrown into writer's block for 2.5 years? So I put on my Sherlock Holmes hat and we went in search of. Well, it turns out that the first 16 books were written in a beautiful 2-story A-frame in the redwoods up above Los Angeles. And it was glass on 2 sides, A-frame, and the whole top floor was his writer's studio. And after breakfast, he'd go up and he was in writer's prison. His wife was like a lioness guarding the gate. Even his children were allowed to see him from 9 to 6. No phone calls. They would all be intercepted. When it was lunchtime, she would take lunch up on a tray and set it down, would not speak, would not distract him, go back down. So from 9 to 6 every day, 6 days a week, he had himself in writer's prison. And he produced 16 books that won international acclaim. Now, I read one of them as preparation for his coming for training. And although brilliant, it had a squeezed out quality, it didn't have like flow to it. But then, of course, he's in writer's prison, writing brilliant stuff, but, under duress, sort of. Okay, so that's how he wrote the first 16 books. Then what happened? Well, he moved to the Malibu colony. And so now his neighbors are the glitterati, the stars, the superstars. He looks at them as empty airheads. He has no interest in them. He's an intellectual. These are famous, rich people, but they're empty and up here as far as he's concerned. But his wife, he's famous. And so the glitterati want him to come to their parties, but he doesn't want to go. His wife wants to go. She wants to, bask in all of this glitter. And so Nathaniel goes, no, I don't want to go. I'm going to stay home and write. Well, guess what? After not being able to write night after night after night, he became vulnerable to his wife's entreaties. And so reluctantly, he would go with his wife to these parties. And his ego loved the adoration and the adulation from the glitterati. And so when I was able to show him that it was his ego that had basically shut down the blood flow to his left occipital so that he wouldn't be able to write, so that the ego would get to go to the party and be fawned over and experience adulation from the glitterati, he actually had an existential crisis that lasted 18 months because he had put his ego where most people put God. And when he discovered that his ego didn't give a hoot for his writings, he had quite an identity shift. And so he had been an Ayn Rand ego adulating person. He worshiped his ego. And that's why he exploded. At one point, he said, people know that in my hands, a fax machine is like a nuclear bomb. Because with words, he could absolutely eviscerate people. And when I challenged his ego by saying, who you think yourself to be at this time, you will know at the end of this training, you never were that person. The ego just, went into a fury. And so that was a story of being Sherlock Holmes, how I solved the problem, not only getting him out of writer's block, but finding how he had gotten into writer's block. It's a classic story of the ego wanting what it wants and not giving a hoot for what the host of the ego parasite wants. He wanted to write. Ego wanted to be fawned over by famous people.
Ah, well, the good win after all. I absolutely love that story, Dr. Hardt. Thank you so much. I know I asked you to stick around for this bonus kind of for my own selfish interests, but I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you so much.
And it's one of the reasons why we decided to create a special training for writers. And we're not just talking about book writers or poem writers, but we're talking about writers of HTML, of assembly code, because all of these go through similar creative processes. I'm a computer programmer myself, and I know what it's like to have 35 subroutines open and writing code there and in the main section and figuring how I'm going to patch them in and loop. And so all of that is profoundly enhanced by increased alpha.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Well, thank you again, Dr. Hardt, for all that you do.
Thank you, Doug, for being here. Appreciate you so much.
Hi, I'm Tony Robbins. Listen, if you are looking to improve your brain, your psyche, your ability, your emotions, your ability to really maximize your performance, and you want to really dig into your brain, my dear friend, Dr. Jim Hardt, and his Biocybernaut program is extraordinary. I've been through it myself. My wife Sage has, members of my family have, and we found it to be truly extraordinary. But it is not for the faint at heart. Unless you're dead serious about really taking things to the next level, don't bother. We went through the Alpha program designed to maximize your ability to create alpha waves. And it was challenging and it was incredibly rewarding. And I'd recommend it to anybody serious about improving the quality of their lives or including the quality of their family lives as well. So check out Cybernaut, check out Dr. Jim Hardt. And if you do, I think you'll be really, really pleased.
And the entire time you are learning to think and how you think these electrodes create sounds. And you learn how to put yourself in the zone of alpha. But it's a bitch. It's horrible. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that wants easy experiences, but I'd recommend it to anybody that wants to grow immensely. And by the first day, I'm like, who do I got to shoot to get out of this thing? Oh, it's me. I'm the one that did this shit. Right? But by the end of the week, all three of us were able to go into this state of alpha. And if you're familiar with alpha, the best way I can describe alpha is there's no problem that can't be solved in alpha. Because every problem that we have was created by us.
Thank you for being here and absorbing this information about the science of brainwaves and about the stories of people whose lives have been beneficially altered, improved by doing brainwave training at Biocybernaut. And now I'm reaching out to you to invite you to come and be a part of the Biocybernaut adventure. Biocybernauts are to inner space what astronauts are to outer space. So come and adventure with us. And if you'd like to leave a comment on the videos, you can do that, or there's a link you can click if you'd like to learn more. We welcome you to Biocybernaut.